I'm going to guess at this point that everyone's already aware of Mr. Roof and the shooting at the Charleston church. I'm also going to guess that everyone at this point is aware of the nationwide debate on removing the rebel flag from government buildings in South Carolina. A debate which is extending out pretty much throughout what's known as the southern region of the United States. I find this interesting because of the flags featured prominently in Roof's photos and on that one of him wearing the jacket that everybody's so happy to fling around, the rebel flag is not really one of them. It's certainly one of the ones being talked about a lot, but considering he's going around wearing the South American flag with apartheid, I'm not entirely sure why a larger discussion about that flag is not being discussed. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm very sure about why the rebel flag is being discussed right now. We've been having this discussion in America for a very, very long time. A lot of people don't like that flag. A lot of people don't like what that flag represents. And a lot of people have a lot of politics tied up in hating that flag. Now, in the interests of full disclosure, I have grown up in the American South. I don't really consider myself a Southerner. I'm a Roman by nature, but I am going to be speaking from personal experience, from knowing people down here, as well as my study of American history. Now, I wanted to do this video as a response to the 5 program on Fox News. I believe it was a couple of days ago, but I couldn't get the footage. Instead, I found one on the Fox News YouTube channel that's honestly even better to discuss, and I am going to rip them a new one on this one. So, do please enjoy.
I'm Greg Jarrett. You're in the Strategy Room. South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley and a bipartisan group of lawmakers came out on Monday to support removing the Confederate flag near the state capitol. But critics say it's not that easy to remove the flag. Both state legislative chambers must vote 2/3 in support of that change. So once the media spotlight is gone, will lawmakers there still push for removal? With reaction now, political strategist David Mercer and Brad Blakeman. Good to see you both.
Thanks.
Brad, this has been debated for, it seems like 100 years. Did the shooting really elevate this now to a level in which people must be forced to address it there?
There's no question about it. And I say better late than never. It's about time that this symbol, what has become a symbol of hatred and division in America, be retired and put in its place, and that's in a museum.
Okay. So because it is a symbol of hate and division, it should be tucked away where most people will never have to see and deal with it. By that logic, the national flag of every nation in existence or having had existed needs to be completely removed from society. Because if blacks see the rebel flag that way, even when the rebel flag has never been flown in their states, because you typically don't see the rebel flag in California, Washington, New York, so on and so forth, then I'm pretty sure that the Native Americans feel the same way about the United States flag, which they see everywhere. But I don't see you insisting we get rid of that one, despite the fact that the national flag of the U.S. is viewed far more divisively around the world than the Confederate flag is.
And other states are going to have to follow the lead of South Carolina, because their flags too have the symbol incorporated of the rebel flag inside their state flag. So it will not stop in South Carolina, but it'll begin there. And I think very shortly that symbol will be retired from the flagpoles of state houses.
So it's not enough to consign an independent flag representing a historical struggle, however noble or ignoble that struggle's driving force was. We now have to go and force states outside of South Carolina to change their state flags, the official state flags, not just which ones they hang up, in addition to getting rid of a flag that offends you. we're starting to sound a bit totalitarian here. You know what? You might be right. The rebel flag might be retired from flagpoles of state houses. State houses that were born of state governments that fought in a rebellion against the national government of America. Inside what would have been their own independent nation if not for the overwhelmingly brutal war that was waged against them. A war that took what was the epitome of a first world nation and turned it into a third world hellhole. Sargon of Akkad did a rather brilliant video on the idea that Okinawa in Japan was a U.S. colony, and Okinawa still is. I'll link to it in the description. But by the standards he puts forth in his video, then the southern states certainly meet the criteria of a colony during the time period after the Civil War. That's really the topic for a larger video, but regardless, the South was not so much an equal part of the Union after the war as it was a conquered nation in many respects.
You know, the debate has been interesting, David. The Confederacy, among other things, fought for the perpetuation of slavery.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there for a moment because this line gets thrown around a lot. Yes, the South fought for slavery to continue. Yes, one of the driving forces for the South's argument and position of states' rights was because of slavery. They didn't want the federal government or other states using the federal government to make it so they couldn't have slaves. But the driving force behind this was not racism. Yes, racism was prevalent in the South and would get much worse after the Civil War. But the North was just as racist and it didn't have slavery. No, the driving force behind it was economics. We live today in a world filled with cars, computers, grocery stores, and the internet. Most of our products are made by machines or shipped in from overseas where they're made by machines or people. Most of us do not know what a day's labor actually has been historically. Most of us think that if we have to spend the day mowing the lawn on a riding mower, we've worked hard, and that a push mower would basically be tantamount to child abuse. The Civil War happened before most of the Industrial Revolution. What this means in very real terms is that the strongest force you had was a horse or an ox. You know that 200 horsepower car you have? Imagine trying to till a field with something that has 1/200th of the power of your car. Going 25 miles in a day's journey was considered fast for most people. And the most efficient workforce you had was not a machine, it was a human being. Houses were heated with wood chopped from trees, built by hand, and if you wanted something you had better know how to build it yourself and be prepared to spend weeks making it. And everything had to be made by hand. The most advanced piece of tech people had, if they were lucky, was a loom. There were no harvesters, no combines, no tractors, nothing. And that's important to know and remember. Because the South was an agricultural, not an industrial society and region. Industrialism was happening, but it was largely in the North. The South represented the breadbasket of the nation at the time. Because remember, we didn't have the Midwest, where most of our food comes from now. So when the South was saying, don't take away our slaves, the driving force wasn't black people or animals we own. It was, hey, this is the only way we have to grow the food you eat and the cotton for the clothes you wear, so don't take it away from us. And given what happened post-Civil War, where the South was turned into a third world nation, and you had massive expansion westward into what would become the new breadbasket, it's hard to say that the South's point was invalid as far as, economic and agricultural situations go.
And, it was heinous, atrocious, cruel, it was unconscionable.
It's funny you would say that. Or that many people say that, in fact. That mic he's wearing, you think it was made in America? How about the fabric of his suit? His phone? Probably not. That probably was all made overseas. His suit might be custom tailored though, but that's a side thing. And do you know what they pay workers overseas? Slave wages. Given that at the time manual labor was the only labor, it is not so unconscionable that slavery existed. We essentially practice slavery today, only it's done by corporations and largely overseas. Out of sight, out of mind. And it's just as brutal now as it was then. Now, sure, back then they had all sorts of metal toys and whips and whatnot, but that was because they couldn't just fire the workers and leave them to starve in the street. Southerners paid about the price most Americans do today for a new car when they purchased a slave. Between $20,000 and $60,000, depending on what you were getting, as an initial investment. That's not counting training, living costs, food costs, etc. So when you drop that kind of money, you want to get your money's worth. Given how workers are still beaten in Asian sweatshops, I'm sorry, did a man using goods made by slave labor just say that slavery is unconscionable?
And in the minds of many people, that flag represents hatred.
Ah, yes. The flag represents hatred. Name me one flag that does not represent hatred to someone. Name me one. Just because a symbol is hateful to one group of people doesn't mean that symbol is hateful. But there's more to this flag than just the war. There's what came after. Before, I mentioned that the South essentially became a colony of the U.S. Post-Civil War, there was a period called Reconstruction. It gets glossed over a lot. A lot. During that time, Northerners, in the form of both the federal government and individual business people, came into the South and did two things. Ostensibly, they were there to reconstruct the South, which had gone from basically the richest part of the nation to the poorest. But that wealth didn't flow into government coffers. No, it was destroyed. Imagine if we took all the currency in the United States and converted it into physical bills. And then we pulled a joker and burned half of it. Poof. Puff of smoke, gone. Well, that's essentially what happened in the South. Entire cities were burned to the ground. Vast numbers of the white male population, which could do the physical labor in place of blacks in some cases, were either killed or maimed so horribly that they couldn't work. And then the entire black population, which in many places outnumbered the whites as much as 3 to 1, were freed. So they weren't there to do the labor either. No one had any money because all the money was tied up in land, which was burned to ashes, property, burned to ashes, or slaves, now free men and no longer worth anything. You had people who were the equivalent of Donald Trump, Steve Jobs, and Steven Spielberg's in terms of wealth suddenly left homeless, and agricultural factories that produced millions of dollars every year, and the food that fed pretty much the entire nation shut down and left inoperable for decades. So you had what was roughly half the United States as a burned out, bankrupt wasteland. And from the north come people who used their money to rebuild the South. But that rebuilding often enough looked like colonization and strip money. Northerners bought houses and land from Southerners for pennies on the dollar. The government came in and ran everything, but mostly to grease the wheels for wealthy Northerners to buy up anything and everything and cart most of it off away. All while leaving the native Southerners destitute, often homeless, and in competition for what dirt-paying jobs there were with millions of newly freed black people. And if capitalism teaches anything, supply versus demand, when supply is up, demand can be filled cheap. And all this was happening while the government kept saying, we did this to free the slaves, which really can only be heard one way when you're dirt poor, starving, and went from being, a high society person, a middle society person, or even a low class person, and now are essentially homeless. Hey, we raped your women to free the slaves. We murdered your sons to free the slaves. We took your homes to free the slaves. We burned your farms to free the slaves. We have made slaves of you to free the slaves. So you have a population of broke, starving, humiliated people that are constantly being kicked in the balls with new, inventive, and even more humiliating ways, and at every turn they are told, hey, this is all because of the black people. Now how do you think any rational, sane, sentient creature is going to react in those circumstances? Remember, Nazi Germany began the Holocaust because the people thought their nation's humiliation and destitution was due to Jewish bankers. And now, in the South, you have an entire nation's worth of people suffering far worse than the Germans were at the time, which was indeed pretty bad. And they're told, hey, those people who built your lands are the reason those lands are now ashes. And then that is codified in the history books for the next 100 years. Black people are the reason you have no hope. Black people are the reason you lost everything your forefathers had. So yeah, many angry Southerners took what was a symbol of their hopes and dreams during the Civil War, an attempt to maintain their freedom and economic stability, something that would represent a golden age compared to what they were currently enduring, and they rallied around it. And they focused their hate on the ones they had been told were responsible, even if those people were in fact innocent.
But the other people say, hey, wait a minute, no, it reflects heritage. You buy that?
For some, I do. We know that the mothers of those that were fallen soldiers in that war see the flag differently than those that parade around in hoods or as the Ku Klux Klan and so forth. But I think, as you had alluded to earlier in talk with Brad, that this was an inspiration. This flag was a symbol and inspiration to the killings in South Carolina.
All right, so you can make the case that this flag was a symbol and inspiration to those killings. Of course, you can argue that a Christian cross is a symbol and inspiration for blowing up an abortion clinic. Symbols are powerful things, and they do give inspiration, but much like anything which belief is tied to, what one man is inspired to do is different from another. Soft rock inspires many people to relax. It inspires me to go insane. Heavy metals inspires me to relax. In other people, it inspires migraine headaches. The symbol itself has no inherent good or evil effect, and to silence a symbol risks alienating those who view it as a good thing.
And because of that overshadowing history, I would agree, and I'd recommend one of the candidates, the GOP candidates, sign Brad up as an advisor, because they need to get out in front of this, as Haley has, and put the flag in a museum.
Okay, I got a bit wordy earlier with the history, so I'm not going to repeat myself. You can just backtrack to the video if you want. Do you want to know why those flags started flying outside the state houses? Some of it had to do with racism. Sure, after all, the South was very much a black versus white area, because it had been made a black versus white area. Jim Crow was the efforts of Southern whites to try and prevent competition between whites and blacks for the very few resources those states had. Flying that rebel flag wasn't just about oppressing black people. It was about letting Southern whites know and see a government building saying, hey, we remember when the North strip mined our lands of everything and left you destitute, but we are here to help you. I cannot stress enough how badly things were economically in the South. Most places didn't have indoor plumbing till the 80s. Most people did not make the minimum wage back then. The reason the most famous Southern sport is NASCAR is because when whiskey running became a viable option of employment, every mother's son grabbed either a car or a still. The only jobs most people could get were dangerous, badly paid, and often enough illegal. While blacks were marching for equality in the South, most whites were trying their damnedest not to let their children starve. And that's why the flag flew at state houses, to let those starving people know, you are not forgotten, we are here for you. And sure, most of it was pure political bullshit to keep the people in power in power. But for your average layman, it wasn't about white over black as much as it was about you getting to survive. So yeah, maybe that does belong in a museum. Maybe it should be put away. But you know what? That won't stop inspiring people to go out and commit shootings like what happened in Charleston.
It's a relic of the past, and let's put it where it belongs, and not pushing it in the faces and or using it as an inspiration to what we saw in South Carolina.
The horrible and gruesome shooting, Brad, may have given some an opportunity to elevate the debate. But others are outright blaming the flag itself. It's not really fair. 3 years ago, for example, 10 members of a white supremacist group were plotting a race war, sort of same thing, and that's Florida. And before that, a different group up in Boston wanted to incite a race war. Now, the Confederate flag was never debated there. And in fact, you can go all the way back to Helter Skelter, Charlie Manson and the Manson family in 1969, same sort of plot there. Is it really fair to connect the two?
I'm going to give in here that he raises a good point. There's been a lot of racial incidents that have not involved the rebel flag and have not sparked this debate. But I want to break it down. Even when this flag is used in the racial debate, most of those using it know about the history that I have stated. They know the history behind the flag and its meaning, probably far better than people protesting the flag do. Many people see the flag and see hate, but many people see the flag and the history behind that flag. Many bad things were done under that flag. This is not debatable. But most of those bad things from the Civil War forwards were done for survival. Slavery was horrible, but it was the only way for Southern commerce to survive, and through Southern commerce for the North to survive on Southern goods. Jim Crow and the KKK were driven as much by the need to fight off a group wanting a limited number of resources that both groups needed to survive, but which could only really sustain one group. It is easier to judge a man and say that he is driven by hate. It is harder to admit that he did a hateful thing to save the ones he loved.
Well, look, each incident should be taken on its own and what the motivation is for sure. But one thing is indisputable, and that is that the Confederate flag is a symbol of hatred and division, a terrible time in our country where brother fought against brother, and the common denominator for that war was slavery.
I am sick of such self-serving logic. The flags of both sides were used in that division. Both flags are equally divisive for different reasons. One represents conquest and oppression, and the other represents slavery. But you're not arguing that we pull down the stars and stripes, are you, you fucking hypocrite? Does the rebel flag stand for hate? Yes! But it is a hate bred by the North for capitalistic and militaristic gain. That's like saying the Scottish flag is a symbol of hate because they fucking fought against the British Empire and were divisive against the English.
And that flag has become a symbol today of hatred and division, and therefore it needs to be taken off public land and put in a place where it belongs. It's part of history, no doubt, and that's where people should learn about it. And it shouldn't be focused upon next to the American flag or below the American flag on state houses, and it needs to be removed.
The reason it is below the American flag is because it was a conquered flag. But your fucking logic, the flag of every conquered nation should be locked away and not presented in public. I suppose you feel Tibet should just shut the fuck up and just obey China, do you? I mean, hell, they're being divisive by resisting. And if your only excuse for locking this one away is, but my slavery, my hatreds, well then you can kindly fuck off, because there is not a nation in this goddamn world older than a couple hundred years which hasn't had slavery. And the only reason the South fought for slavery was because its two options were go to war and risk losing everything, or lose everything. So maybe, instead of ignoring history and why there might be some hatred tied up with a symbol, you try fucking educating yourself, you totalitarian, censoring bastard.
And put it in a museum in its place, let people learn about it, and remove that kind of temptation for it to be exploited in the future.
You know what will build the temptation for something like Charleston to happen in the future? Taking down the flag like this. Because if identity politics and history has taught me anything, it's this. When you demonize a group of people, when you take away their symbols, desecrate them as evil, and force their removal, when you strip people of their heritage and the remembrances they have because you say those remembrances are evil, you do not teach them to believe the way you do. You teach them to hate. You teach them that they are going to be victimized. You teach them that their culture is going to be raped and murdered, that their people have no value. You teach them that if they try to speak up peacefully, to protest, to try and defend themselves, that they will be crushed to the full extent of the power and will of those who oppose them. You will teach them that the only option they have left is violence. You want to stop men like Ruth? Give them a voice. Let them talk peacefully and openly. You do not silence them, you do not vilify them, and you do not attempt to crush them. Because then what they do is what Ruth did. They find a group of people that represents all the bad things happening to them, and they murder them, because that is the only way their voice will be heard.
If I might add to that, the argument's been made. Let's preserve the Confederacy flag in the spirit of, or because of states' rights. But we all know the Civil War, fighting for states' rights, meant for the right to enslave another people.
I'm getting real tired of your bullshit 101, you privileged ass. You live in a world where everything is handed to you on a goddamn plate. You have no idea what it was like in a pre-industrial society. You have never worked in a field. You have never had to worry about each and every bite from a mosquito killing you. And that's one of the major reasons blacks were enslaved. They had immunity to malaria, which white people didn't, and they could survive working in places where white people couldn't. I mean, heck, South Carolina was built on rice plantations, okay? Nothing but swamps and mosquitoes that kill you.
So let's just we all understand that?
No, you do not understand that. At this point, I suspect the three of you don't understand a goddamn thing. The world we live in is as different from back then as Rome was to China. Everything was out to kill you. Everything. And the only way to survive was by impossible, backbreaking work. And you needed a shit ton of people to do it. Sure, whites might have been able to breed themselves into a population capable of doing the work themselves, but it would have taken hundreds of years and killed millions of women and billions of children to get to that point. And the option presented itself where you could watch people you loved die, scrabbling in the dirt like worms. Or you could take all these extra people from another place who were way too happy to fucking sell each other off and get them out of their own area, and do in years what it would take centuries. Now, would any of you three like to make that choice? Would any of you fucking bigots even understand that choice? To watch your wives and children die, knowing you could have saved them, but you didn't because, oh my god, slavery is evil. Especially in a world where slavery had not only been a way of life since human civilization began, it was completely morally acceptable.
It's now time to put it, as Brad said, in a museum.
Before the shooting, polling data indicated that a majority of white South Carolinians wanted to keep the flag, a majority of blacks did not.
Of course it broke down this way. Whites saw the flag as a symbol of their struggle from conquered and starving people to finally getting back on their feet. And blacks see it as those evil white people who managed to do better than us. Look, I'm not racist. I really don't care what skin a person has. But black people aren't always in the right, and white people aren't always in the wrong, no matter how horrible events in history were. There is history here. Dark, terrible history, marked by mass suffering on both sides. Pluto. If you'd asked the Scottish and English after one of their wars, you'd probably get a similar split on good and bad based on population.
One wonders, will the shooting have changed that dynamic? And second of all, can it reach the level in both state houses, 2/3 votes to remove it?
I think it will, and adding to the poll that you mentioned, that where there's some division among the respective races, you now have companies like Walmart that have just announced today that they are going to no longer sell the Confederate flag in their stores.
Right.
So I think you're going to see other elements of the debate enter into it to guide us further to, again, putting this flag in a museum, which is not to destroy it, not to burn it, what have you, but to preserve it for history and what it means, what that history is to a whole host of people.
Of course you do, you elitist prick. You think you're in the right, you know everything, and that people will automatically agree with you. And as for Walmart and Amazon and so forth, who are not only stripping the rebel flag from their shelves, they're banning the sale entirety from, here on out. Well done. You are now censoring and shaming a group of people on what they believe. Remember, what I said about how the best way to breed more shootings was to do exactly this? Well done. You've now alienated an entire population who sees, hey, this place thinks I'm shit. And in the case of Walmart, hey, it's a place where, I bought all my shit. So much for, loyalty from the people you buy from. Wonder how well that's going to end up working out for you. You're censoring freedom of expression. It doesn't matter if that expression is distasteful to you. It should still be free. Its freedom is guaranteed by the laws of this country, you totalitarian dipshits.
David and Brad, thanks very much. Tough subject, and we'll continue to follow it. Check out foxnews.com for more on this developing story. I'm Greg Jarrett. Thanks for watching.
A funny thing happens when you put history in a museum. Oh, sure, you preserve it, but people forget about it. Oh, hey, well, it's being preserved, right? I don't have to worry about it then. See, we did that with the Holocaust. We stuck it in nice, tidy museums filled with pictures and stories. We preserved a few camps, made a few memorial stones, and patted ourselves on the back and said, good job, everyone, let's go home. It won't happen again. Of course, anti-Semitism is on the rise throughout the Americas, Europe, and Middle East. In fact, it has gotten so bad in Europe that most Jews in every European nation are now looking to immigrate to Israel. That's right. They would rather live in a place with near daily suicide bombings, terrorist attacks, and missile strikes than live in Europe. In America, many Jewish students are trying to hide their Jewish identity, and some have even been arrested for daring to speak out against the anti-Semitism they are facing. So yeah, fucking put shit in a museum. It's not gonna work. Oh sure, some people might not be offended by seeing a rebel flag or a pile of dead bodies, but hey, better for them not to be offended. It's not like anything bad will happen by shoving it under a carpet. This is a tough subject. It's tough because the narrative we have about the flag. It's tough because we really only respect one side view of the flag as well. Roof did what he did because he was unstable, he was drugged, and most importantly, because he was ostracized. His views were verboten. He had no voice. His history was silenced, demonized, and given no room for expression. Now, as I said before, I'm not a Southerner. I am a Roman. Rome was built on war and slaves, so I am biased. But just because someone long ago did something that we now consider evil does not make them evil. Just because people recently did things we now consider wrong does not make them evil. People like to believe that those who they do not agree with and do not behave as those judging think they should do it for the evils. The truth is always more complicated than that. The South ran on slavery. That was the only option the South had. There was no other way to produce what they needed to make, what they were required to make. If white Southerners were the owners of slaves, it was because they too had been made slaves to the industrial North, who demanded Southern goods at cheap prices. There was no Southern mechanical production. They grew the crops like cotton, which were then shipped to the North to be turned into fabrics, which were then sold back to the South. The South produced, the North created. And while many like to believe the North went to war with good intentions of freeing the slaves, the truth is most Northerners didn't give a rat's ass about slavery or black people. They went to war to stop their producers from leaving and making their own nation. It is hilarious to me that all those people who screamed about America going to war for oil cheer at the fact that America went to war for cotton. Because in the end, that's what the Civil War was. The federal government and the pockets of big businesses of the North didn't want their cheap little production centers running off and being independent. No different from all those corporations who fix things so they always have cheap labor for their feminist t-shirts, their iPhones, and their cars.